The rain hammered against my windshield as I pulled into the driveway of 847 Maple Street. I'd been driving for 3 hours straight, fighting through one of the worst storms Pennsylvania had seen all year. My phone had died somewhere outside Harrisburg, and I was running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. All I wanted was to reach my destination, drop off the legal documents I'd been carrying, find the nearest motel for the night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But when Sarah Mitchell opened that front door, her mascara streaked down her cheeks and her wedding ring catching the porch light, I knew this wasn't going to be the simple delivery I'd planned. Her words hit me like a physical blow. My husband's gone. Then she looked directly into my eyes with a desperation I'd never seen before and asked, "Would you stay the night?" I should have said no. Should have handed her the papers, offered my condolences, and driven away into that storm. But something in her voice, something in the way she stood there trembling in that doorway, made me hesitate. And that hesitation changed everything. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I'm a process server. Not the most glamorous job in the world, but it pays the bills and keeps me moving. I've been doing this work for 8 years now, ever since I got out of the Army and needed something that didn't require sitting behind a desk all day. There's something about the road. It's about never knowing what you'll encounter when you knock on someone's door that keeps life interesting. Most of the time, it's routine. Divorce papers, custody modifications, small claims summons people aren't usually happy to see me, but they take their papers and that's that. Occasionally you get someone who tries to run or hide, but eventually they all get served. It's just business. The Mitchell case was supposed to be different, though. These weren't divorce papers or legal troubles. I was carrying insurance documents related to a workplace accident paperwork that would actually help the family rather than hurt them. David Mitchell had been injured on a construction site 6 months earlier, and the insurance company was finally ready to settle. Good news, for once. I'd driven up from Baltimore that Tuesday morning, planning to make the delivery and maybe grab dinner somewhere in Clearfield before heading back home. The weather forecast had mentioned possible afternoon showers, but nothing. That seemed concerning. Pennsylvania in October can be unpredictable, but I'd driven through worse by the time I hit Route 80, though the sky had turned an ominous shade of gray-green that made my stomach clench. I'd seen skies like that in Afghanistan, right before the worst storms would roll through our base. The first drop started falling around 2 o'clock, gentle at first, then steadily building into something more serious. I called ahead to let the Mitchells know I was running a bit behind schedule, but the call went straight to voicemail. No. Big deal people aren't always available to take calls from unknown numbers, especially when they're expecting legal documents. I left a brief message explaining who I was, and that I'd be there within the hour. The storm intensified as I took the exit toward Clearfield. What had started as heavy rain was now a full-blown downpour with wind gusts that made my Honda Civic feel like a toy car. I had to slow down to 30 miles per hour just to see the road clearly, and even then I was white-knuckling the steering wheel. Tree branches littered the asphalt. I passed 2 cars pulled over with their hazard lights flashing. Part of me wondered if I should call this off and try again tomorrow, but I was already so close. The Mitchells were probably worried about their insurance settlement. I hated the idea of making them wait another day for what should be good. Maple Street was in an older neighborhood, the kind where all the houses were built in the 1960s, with big front yards and mature oak trees. Normally it probably looked peaceful and suburban, but in this weather it felt almost eerie. The storm had knocked out power to several houses, and the ones that still had electricity cast strange shadows through the rain. Number 847 was a modest 2-story, colonial with white siding and black shutters. The porch light was on, which was a good sign, and I could see lights in the windows. At least they still had power. I grabbed the manila envelope containing the insurance documents and made a run for the front door. Getting soaked in the 10 seconds it took to cross their front yard, I rang the doorbell and waited, shaking water off my jacket. Through the glass panels beside the door, I could see movement inside, but it took almost a full minute before anyone answered. When the door finally opened, I was struck immediately by how different Sarah Mitchell looked from what I had expected. I'd been doing this job long enough to develop a sense for people based on their names and addresses. Sarah Mitchell, wife of a construction worker, living in a middle-class neighborhood in central Pennsylvania, pictured someone middle-aged, probably a little worn down by life, maybe suspicious of a stranger showing up at her door with legal paperwork. Instead, Sarah Mitchell was probably in her early 30s, with shoulder-length auburn hair and green eyes that would have been striking under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Her face was puffy from crying, her makeup was smeared. She was wearing what looked like the same clothes she'd slept in. She looked like someone who'd been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for longer than anyone should have to. "Mrs. Mitchell?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I had the right house. "I'm Marcus Thompson, the process server. I called earlier about some insurance documents for your husband." That's when she said it. "My husband's gone." The words came out flat, emotionless, like she'd been practicing them. But her eyes told a different story. There was pain there, and confusion, and something that looked almost like relief mixed with guilt. "I'm sorry," I said, not sure how to respond. Gone could mean a lot of things. Deployed military, work travel, or something worse? Should I come back another time? "These are actually good news insurance settlement documents." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could hear the storm raging behind me. The rain was coming down so hard now that it sounded like static on a radio. Thunder rolled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the crack of a tree falling. "You can't drive in this," she said, looking past me at the weather. "The roads are flooding." I heard on the radio that they're telling people to stay off Route 80. I turned to look back at my car, which was already sitting in several inches of water that hadn't been there when I'd parked 5 minutes earlier. The storm drains in this neighborhood clearly weren't designed to handle this kind of downpour. "I'll be fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "I just need you to sign for these documents, and I'll get out of your hair." "No," she said, and there was something almost desperate in her voice. "You can't drive in this. It's not safe." She paused, looking at me with those green eyes that seemed to be weighing something I couldn't understand. "Would you stay the night?" The question hung in the air between us like a physical thing. I've been asked a lot of strange things in 8 years of process serving, but never that. And the way she asked it, not like someone being polite or neighborly, but like someone who genuinely needed another human being to stay in that house with her. "Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate the concern, but I really should. Please." The word came out barely above a whisper. "I can't. I don't want to be alone tonight. Not tonight." I looked back at the storm again. The water around my car was definitely getting deeper, and I could see debris flowing down the street like a river. My phone was dead, so I couldn't check road conditions or call for updates. And there was something about the way Sarah Mitchell stood there in her doorway. This woman I'd never met before, asking a complete stranger to stay because she couldn't bear to be alone. "What happened to your husband?" I asked gently. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, I could see her making some kind of decision. "He left this morning," she said. "Packed a bag and left." I said he couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. Said he needed time to think. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. 22 years of marriage, and he needs time to think. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating both of our faces in stark white light. The thunder that followed was so loud it seemed to shake the ground. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. I'd served enough divorce papers to recognize the look of someone whose world had just fallen apart. "But I'm not sure it's appropriate for me, too." "I know how this looks," she interrupted. "I know what you're thinking. Woman alone, husband, just left, asking some stranger to spend the night. But I'm not. ... This isn't what you think. I just ... She trailed off, struggling to find the words. "What is it?" I asked. "I've never been alone in this house," she said. "Not once in 15 years. David and I bought this place right after we got married, and one of us has always been here. Always. Even when he worked night shifts, I knew he'd be home in the morning. Even when I went to visit my sister in Ohio, he was here keeping things running. She gestured around at the house behind her, and I could see her point. It was clearly a family home, the kind of place that was meant to be filled with voices and activity. The silence behind her seemed almost oppressive. And now he's just ... gone. No forwarding address, no timeline for when he might come back. Nothing. He took his clothes and his tools and drove away like our entire life together meant nothing. Her voice was getting stronger now, anger mixing with the hurt. The storm started an hour after he left, and I keep thinking he's going to come back, that he'll realize he made a mistake. But he's not coming back, is he? I didn't know how to answer that. I'd seen enough broken marriages to know that sometimes people do come back, and sometimes they don't, and there's no way to predict which way it'll go. The thing is, she continued, I'm not even sure I want him to come back. Does that make me a horrible person? 22 years, and I'm sitting here thinking maybe I'm better off without him. Another crack of thunder, this one so close I could smell the ozone in the air. The lights in the house flickered but stayed on. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I don't think that makes you horrible, I said. I think it makes you human. She looked at me then, really looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. What's your name again? Marcus Thompson? Marcus. She tested the name, nodding slightly. I'm Sarah, and I know this is crazy, asking you to stay. I know. You don't know me from anyone, and for all you know, I could be some kind of lunatic. But I'm not. I'm just scared to be alone tonight. In this house, with this storm, with everything that's happened today, I glanced back at my car again. The water was definitely deeper now, probably deep enough to cause real problems if I tried to drive through it. And Route 80 was the main artery back toward Baltimore if it was really flooded like she'd said. I might be stuck anyway. I have a guest room, Sarah said, following my gaze. Clean sheets, separate bathroom. You wouldn't have to. I mean, this isn't about anything inappropriate. I just need someone else in the house tonight. Someone to talk to, maybe? Or just to know that I'm not completely alone while I figure out what comes next. The rain chose that moment to intensify even further, if that was possible. It was coming down in sheets now, and I could barely see my car through the deluge. Okay, I heard myself say, I'll stay. The relief on her face was immediate and profound, like I'd just thrown her a lifeline. Thank you, God, thank you. Come in, please, before you drown out there. I stepped into the foyer, dripping wet despite my jacket. The house was warm and smelled like coffee and something that might have been homemade bread. It was clearly a home where people had lived and loved and built a life together. Family photos on the walls, a well-worn couch in the living room. The kind of accumulated comfort that comes from years of shared routine. Let me get you a towel, Sarah said, closing the door behind me and engaging both the deadbolt and the chain lock. And maybe some dry clothes. David left plenty behind. As she bustled around getting me settled, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten myself into. I'd never done anything like this before, staying overnight with a client, especially one who was clearly in emotional crisis. Every professional instinct I had was telling me this was a bad idea, but looking at Sarah Mitchell, seeing the way her hands shook slightly as she handed me a towel, seeing the desperate gratitude in her eyes when I'd agreed to stay, I knew I'd made the right choice. Whatever was happening here, whatever had really driven her husband away, this woman needed help. And sometimes help is as simple as making sure someone doesn't have to face their worst night alone. The storm raged on outside. Somewhere in the distance I could hear sirens. It was going to be a long night, and I had the feeling that by morning, both Sarah Mitchell and I would be very different people than we were right now. Sarah led me through the living room toward a staircase, passing family photos that told the story of a marriage in reverse chronological order. The most recent ones showed a couple who looked tired, their smiles forced and distant.
Oh.
But the older photos, the ones from what must have been their early years together, showed to people who genuinely seemed happy to be in each other's company. The guest room is upstairs, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the hallway. Second door on the right. There's a bathroom right across the hall that you can use. I followed her up the carpeted stairs, noting how the house felt lived in but well maintained. This wasn't the home of people who'd given up on their life together, at least not until recently. Everything was clean, organized, cared for, which made David Mitchell's sudden departure even more puzzling. The guest room was modest but comfortable, with a queen-sized bed covered in a blue and white quilt that looked handmade. A small dresser sat against one wall, topped with a lamp, and a few paperback novels. The window looked out over the backyard, where I could see the storm turning what had probably been a nice garden into a muddy disaster. "I'll get you some of David's clothes," Sarah said from the doorway. "We're about the same height, maybe a little broader in the shoulders, but they should work." She paused, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He left most of his casual stuff behind, only took his work clothes and a few personal items. She disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone to process the strangeness of the situation. I peeled off my wet jacket and hung it over the back of a chair, then walked to the window to check on my car. The water level had definitely risen. Had been puddles were now small streams running down the street. I was definitely not driving anywhere tonight. Sarah returned with an armload of clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, a gray sweatshirt, and what looked like brand new socks and underwear. "The underwear and socks are new," she said, apparently reading my mind. "I bought them for David's birthday last month, but he never opened the packages." There was a bitter edge to her voice. "Guess he won't be needing them now," she set the clothes on the bed and turned to leave, then stopped. "Marcus, I know this is weird and I know you don't owe me anything, but would you mind if we talked? I mean, after you get changed? I haven't really had anyone to talk to about all this. And I think I might go crazy if I have to spend the whole evening alone with my thoughts." "Of course," I said. "That's fine. I'll make some coffee. Come down whenever you're ready." After she left, I changed into David Mitchell's clothes, which fit better than I'd expected. The jeans were a little loose in the waist, but the right length, and the flannel shirt was actually more comfortable than my own wet clothes had been. It felt strange wearing another man's clothing, especially in his own house, especially when that man had apparently walked out on his marriage just that morning. I found Sarah in the kitchen, which was larger than it had appeared from the hallway. She'd obviously been cooking when I arrived. There were ingredients scattered across the counter for what looked like it was going to be a substantial dinner. 2 chicken breasts sat thawing on a plate, and she'd been in the middle of chopping vegetables when her world had fallen apart. "I was making David's favorite meal," she said, following my gaze to the abandoned dinner preparation. "Chicken parmesan with roasted vegetables. Every Tuesday for 15 years, that's what we had for dinner. He called it our tradition." Laughed, but it came out hollow. I guess some traditions die hard, even when the person they're meant for doesn't want them anymore. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine that looked like it had seen better days, but still made coffee that smells incredible. We sat across from each other at a small round table by the window, where the sound of rain against glass created an oddly intimate atmosphere. "So," Sarah said, wrapping her hands around her mug like she needed warmth, "tell me about yourself, Marcus Thompson, process server. How does someone end up in that line of work?" I gave her the abbreviated version military service, needing a job that kept me moving, the strange satisfaction of completing tasks that other people found difficult or unpleasant. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, and I got the sense that she was genuinely interested rather than just making conversation. 8 years, she mused when I finished. That's a long time to be delivering bad news to people. It's not always bad news, I said. Today, for instance, I'm carrying insurance settlement documents for your husband. Good news, actually the company he was working for when he got injured is finally paying out. Sarah's expression darkened. How much? I glanced at the envelope I'd set on the counter when I came in. I can't give you specific details, but it's substantial. Enough to make a real difference. Enough to start over somewhere else, she said quietly. Is that why he left today? Did he know this was coming? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but now that she mentioned it, the timing did seem suspicious. I don't know. The settlement was finalized yesterday, and the company said they'd been trying to reach him for the past week. Sarah stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the storm. That son of a bitch, she said, her voice low but filled with a fury I hadn't heard before. He knew. Had to have known. "Sarah, no. Listen to me." She turned back to face me, and I could see the pieces clicking together in her mind. 3 weeks ago, David started acting strange, distant, secretive. He'd get phone calls and step outside to take them. He started working late more often than usual, and when I asked him about it, he just said the company was dealing with insurance stuff related to his accident. She began pacing the small kitchen, her coffee forgotten on the table. Then last week, he started talking about how maybe we needed a fresh start. Maybe we should think about moving somewhere new, starting over. He said the accident had made him realize life was short, and maybe we'd gotten too comfortable, too settled. The pieces were fitting together in a way that painted David Mitchell in an increasingly unflattering light. If he'd known about the settlement and had been planning to leave, the timing of his departure made a lot more sense. And then this morning, Sarah continued, he woke up early and started packing, just like that. No discussion, no attempt to work things out. Just, I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I need time to think. Like our entire marriage was some burden he'd been carrying, and he finally decided to put it down. She stopped pacing and looked directly at me. He was planning to leave anyway, wasn't he? The insurance money just made it easier. I didn't know how to answer that. I've seen enough domestic situations in my work to know that marriages fall apart for all kinds of reasons. And money often makes everything more complicated rather than less. But the timing definitely seemed suspicious. I can't say for sure, I told her. But it's possible he knew the settlement was coming. Sarah sat back down heavily, like the weight of realization was physically pressing down on her. 22 years, she said. We met when I was 23 years old. I've spent my entire adult life with that man, building a life together, making compromises, making sacrifices. And the minute he gets a chance to start over somewhere else with a pocket full of money, he's gone. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up again, there were tears in her eyes, but also something that looked like determination. You know what the really pathetic part is? She said. I was going to surprise him tonight. The chicken parmesan, candles, that bottle of wine we've been saving for a special occasion. I thought maybe if I reminded him of the good times, if I showed him that I still cared about making him happy, we could work through whatever was bothering him. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the entire house. The lights flickered again, staying off for several seconds before coming back on. Backup generator, Sarah explained, noticing my concerned look. David installed it after. We lost power for 3 days during that ice storm 2 years ago. He was always good at taking care of practical things like that. I just never thought I'd be grateful for it, because he wasn't here to take care of anything else. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. I found myself studying Sarah's face in the soft kitchen light, trying to understand what kind of woman she was beneath the hurt and anger. She was clearly intelligent, clearly someone who'd been carrying more emotional weight than she should have to. But there was also a strength there, resilience that suggested she'd find a way to survive this, even if she couldn't see it yet. I ask you something, she said eventually. Sure, in your work, serving papers and dealing with people in difficult situations, do you ever see marriages that actually work out? I mean, do people ever really make it through the hard times and come out stronger on the other side? The question caught me off guard. It wasn't something I'd thought about much, but now that she'd asked, I realized I had more experience with failing relationships than successful ones. Divorce papers, custody battles, restraining orders. My job brought me into contact with love gone wrong far more often than love gone right. Honestly, I said, most of what I see are the relationships that are already broken. By the time someone needs a process server, things have usually gone pretty far downhill. But yeah, I've seen couples who manage to work things out. It's usually the ones who are still talking to each other, still treating each other with respect. Even when they're angry. David and I stopped talking months ago, Sarah said. Really talking, I mean. We'd discussed schedules and bills and whose turn it was to take out the trash, but we weren't connecting anymore. We weren't sharing our thoughts or dreams or fears. We were just coexisting. She got up to refill her coffee cup, moving around. The kitchen with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd performed these routines thousands of times. But I could see the way she paused at certain spots by the refrigerator, where a shopping list was held up with magnets that spelled out love, by the windowsill where a small potted plant was wilting from neglect. "The thing is," she said, settling back into her chair, "I don't even know when it started going wrong. It wasn't one big fight or one dramatic moment. It was just ... gradual. Like we slowly drifted apart without either of us really noticing. Until one day, we looked up and realized we were strangers living in the same house." "What about before?" I asked. "What were things like when you first got together?" For the first time since I'd arrived, Sarah's face softened into something that might have been a genuine smile. "We were so young," she said. "So sure we had everything figured out. David was working construction even then, just starting out, but he had all these plans. He was going to start his own company someday, build custom homes for people who wanted something special. I was working at the bank downtown, saving money so we could buy our own place." She gestured around the kitchen. "This house was our dream home back then. 3 bedrooms, big backyard, quiet neighborhood. We'd drive by it on weekends and talk about what we'd do if we could afford it. When it finally went on the market, we scraped together every penny we had for the down payment." "It's a nice house," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything that had happened, despite the sadness that seemed to permeate the air now, I could see what they'd fallen in love with. "About this place, we were happy here," Sarah said. "For a long time, we really were. We hosted Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings. We talked about filling those extra bedrooms with kids someday. David would come home covered in sawdust and dirt, and I'd have dinner waiting, and we'd sit right here at this table and plan our future together." "What happened to those plans?" Sarah was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We couldn't have children," she said. "We tried for years, went through all kinds of treatments, and procedures and specialists. It became the center of our entire relationship, month after month of hope, followed by disappointment. And somewhere in all of that trying and failing and trying again, we forgot how to just be together." The weight of that revelation settled over the kitchen like a physical presence. I delivered papers related to custody disputes and family court proceedings. I'd never really thought about the couples on the other side, the ones who wanted children but couldn't have them, whose marriages had to survive that particular kind of heartbreak. "I'm sorry," I said, knowing the words were inadequate, but needing to say them anyway. "It's not your fault," Sarah replied. "It's not anyone's fault, really. That's what made it so hard. If it had been something we could fix or blame or fight against, maybe we could have handled it better. But it was just ... biology. Random chance. Bad luck." Lightning illuminated the kitchen in stark white light, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that seemed to go on forever. When it finally faded, Sarah was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You know what's funny?" she said. "David leaving today is the first time in years that I've felt anything other than numb. I'm hurt and angry and scared, but at least I'm feeling something. For the longest time, it was like we were both just going through the motions, pretending everything was fine when really we were both drowning." She stood up and walked to the window again, pressing her palm against the glass. "Maybe that's why I asked you to stay," she said without turning around. "Not just because I didn't want to be alone, but because I needed to talk to someone who doesn't know our whole sad story. Someone who could see me as more than just half of a broken marriage." I joined her at the window, looking out at a neighborhood that was barely recognizable under the assault of wind and rain. Trees were bent nearly horizontal, and debris was flying through the air like missiles. "For what it's worth," I said, "you seem like a lot more than that to me." She turned to look at me then, and for a moment I thought she might cry again. Instead, she surprised me by laughing, not the bitter, hollow sound from before, but something that sounded almost genuine. "You know what, Marcus Thompson," she said, "I think this might be the most honest conversation I've had in years." The power went out completely around 9:30, plunging the house into darkness so complete I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The backup generator kicked in almost immediately, but only the essential circuits came back online. Few lights, the refrigerator, and what sounded like a heating system somewhere in the basement. "That's normal," Sarah said, her voice coming from somewhere to my left in the dim kitchen. "David programmed it to only run the basics to conserve fuel. We've got maybe 12 hours of power this way." Confidence of someone who knew every inch of her home, retrieving candles from drawers and matches from a cabinet beside the stove. Soon the kitchen was filled with warm, flickering light that made everything feel smaller and more intimate. "This is actually kind of nice," Sarah said, settling back into her chair. "When's the last time you sat by candlelight and just talked to someone?" I couldn't remember. My life had become a series of hotels and fast food restaurants and conversations that never went deeper than directions or weather. Sitting here with Sarah, watching shadows dance across her face in the candlelight, felt like something from a different world entirely. "You never told me if you're married," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. "Divorced," I replied. 3 years ago, kids? Don't. We talked about it, but the timing never seemed right. Then suddenly we were talking. About lawyers instead of babies. Sarah nodded like she understood something I hadn't quite said. "What happened?" It was my turn to stare into my coffee cup, surprised by how much I wanted to tell her. Maybe it was the storm, or the candlelight, or the surreal nature of the entire evening, but I found myself opening up in a way I rarely did with anyone. Her name was Jennifer. We met in college and dated for 6 years before we got married. She was studying to be a teacher, and I was finishing my degree in criminal justice. We had this whole plan mapped out tight. I'd join the police force. She'd teach elementary school. We'd buy a house in the suburbs and start a family. But you ended up in the Army instead. Yeah, 9/11s happened during my senior year, and suddenly everything changed. I felt like I needed to serve, needed to do something. That mattered. Jennifer supported the decision, at least at first. She said we were young, we could put our plans on hold for a few years. The candles flickered as a particularly strong gust of wind rattled the windows. Outside, I could hear things crashing and banging in the storm, but inside the kitchen felt like a sanctuary. "Let me guess," Sarah said gently. A few years turned into longer than expected. 2 tours in Afghanistan. I came back different than when I left, and Jennifer had changed too. She'd built a life without me, found her rhythm as a teacher, made friends I didn't know. When I got back, it was like we were 2 strangers trying to pretend we still knew each other. "Did you try to make it work?" "For a while, but I couldn't settle into civilian life the way she wanted me to. I was restless. Couldn't sit still, couldn't handle the routine of a normal job. She couldn't understand why I couldn't just go back to being the person I was before I left." Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying my face in the candlelight. "Is that why you became a process server? Because you couldn't sit still?" "Partly. But also because I was good at finding people, at getting them to cooperate even when they didn't want to. The Army taught me how to read situations, how to stay calm under pressure. Turns out those are useful skills when you're knocking on strangers' doors with legal documents. And Jennifer? She remarried 2 years ago. Another teacher. They've got a baby now, from what I heard. I surprised myself by how little that information stung anymore. She got the life she wanted, just with someone else. Sarah reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." It was at the time. But now I think we both did each other a favor by ending it when we did. We weren't making each other happy anymore. We were just existing together out of habit and stubbornness, like David and me. Maybe, but you had 22 years together. That's not nothing. Sarah pulled her hand back and wrapped it around her coffee mug again. Sometimes I wonder if 22 years just means 22 years of making the same mistakes over and over until they become permanent. Before I could respond, a massive crash echoed from somewhere outside, followed by a grinding, scraping sound that went on for several seconds. We both rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. "I think that was the big oak tree in the Hendersons' yard," Sarah said, pressing her face against the glass. "It's been sick for years. They kept saying they were going to have it taken down, but the tree, or what was left of it, had fallen directly onto the power lines that ran behind the houses on this side of the street. Even in the dim light from our kitchen window, I could see the tangle of branches and cables stretching across what had been the Hendersons' backyard. "We're going to be without power for a while," I said. "Days, probably. Maybe longer if the storm keeps up like this." Sarah turned away from the window and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Good thing you decided to stay." There was something in her voice, not quite flirtation, but an awareness of our situation that hadn't been there before. We were strangers who'd been thrown together by circumstances. Sitting in candlelight while a storm raged outside, and suddenly the air between us felt charged with possibility. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I want you to know that I'm not. I didn't agree to stay because I know," she interrupted. "Neither did I, but we're here now, and—" She trailed off, seeming to wrestle with something. "Can I tell you? Something I've never told anyone?" I nodded. "At the morning David left, before he started packing, we had sex for the first time in 8 months." The words came out in a rush, like she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. It wasn't passionate or romantic or anything like that. It was just ... mechanical. Like we were both going through the motions of being married without actually feeling anything. She stood up and began pacing the small kitchen again, her shadow dancing on the walls in the candlelight. And afterward, I lay there next to him and realized that I felt more alone than I had when I was actually alone. Does that make sense? I was lying next to the man I'd been married to for over 2 decades, and I felt like I was on another planet. "It makes perfect sense," I said, and it did. I remembered feeling exactly the same way with Jennifer during those last months of our marriage. So when he got up and started packing his bags, part of me was relieved. Finally, we could stop pretending. Finally, we could both admit that whatever we'd had was over. She stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "But then you showed up, and we started talking, and I realized that I haven't felt this connected to another person in years." The admission hung in the air between us like a living thing. I could feel the weight of it, the implications of what she was saying. This woman, who'd just been abandoned by her husband of 22 years, was telling me that she felt more connected to me, a complete stranger, than she had to the man she'd married. "Sarah, I'm not asking you for anything," she said quickly. "I'm not trying to seduce you or use you as some kind of rebound or revenge against David. I needed you to know that having you here tonight, being able to talk to you like this, it's the first time I've felt like myself in longer than I can remember." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the kitchen in stark white light for just a moment before plunging us back into the warm glow of candlelight. In that brief moment of harsh illumination, I could see the vulnerability in Sarah's face, the way she was looking at me like I might be the answer to a question she'd been afraid to ask. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "After tonight, after the storm passes and David's insurance money gets sorted out." Sarah sat back down, but this time she chose the chair next to mine instead of across the table. "I don't know," she said. "For the first time in my adult life, I genuinely don't know what comes next. And you know what? It's actually kind of exciting. Think about it. I've been following the same routine for 15 years. Same job, same house, same dinner schedule, same everything. I haven't made a single decision based on what I actually wanted rather than what was expected or practical or safe." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with something that looked like anticipation. "Now suddenly I can do anything. Go anywhere. Be anyone. The insurance money will help with that." "It's not about the money," Sarah said. "Well, not entirely. It's about freedom. David leaving today, as much as it hurt, it also set me free from a life that wasn't making either of us happy." She reached over and touched my hand again, but this time she didn't pull away. "You showing up tonight, staying here with me, it's talking to me like I'm a real person, instead of just some sad abandoned wife that's given me something I'd forgotten I was missing. What's that?" "Hope," she said simply. "Hope that there's more to life than just going through the motions. Hope that I can still connect with people, that I can still feel something real." I looked down at her hand covering mine, at the wedding ring she was still wearing, despite everything that had happened. "You're still married," I said quietly. "Technically." She followed my gaze to her ring finger. "But David made his choice this morning. He chose to leave rather than fight for what we had. He chose to give up on us." She slipped the ring off her finger and set it on the table between us. It sat there in the candlelight, a small circle of gold that represented 22 years of shared history, now abandoned as easily as its wearer had been. "I'm not making any decisions tonight," she said. "I'm not asking you to make any either. But I want you to know that whatever happens next, having you here tonight has reminded me that I'm still alive. I'm still capable of feeling something other than numb resignation." The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the kitchen, surrounded by candlelight and the warmth of honest conversation, it felt like we were in our own private world. A world where two people who'd been damaged by life could sit together and recognize something in each other that they'd forgotten existed. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. "For what?" "For letting me stay, for trusting me with your story, for reminding me that sometimes the most unexpected nights can turn out to be exactly what you need." Sarah smiled then, the first truly genuine smile I'd seen from her since I'd arrived. "The night's not over yet," she said. "Who knows what other surprises it might have in store?" Around 11 o'clock, the generator started making a rattling sound that grew progressively louder until Sarah finally got up to check on it. I followed her down to the basement, where the machine sat in a corner surrounded by the accumulated debris of a long marriage Christmas decorations. Boxes of old photos, exercise equipment that had clearly been abandoned years ago. "David always handled the mechanical stuff," Sarah said, staring at the generator with a helpless expression. "I don't even know where to begin." I knelt down beside the machine and ran my hands along the housing, feeling for loose connections or obvious problems. The Army had taught me basic maintenance on all kinds of equipment, and generators weren't much different from the ones we'd used overseas. "Looks like the mounting bolts have worked loose," I said, pointing to where the vibration had caused several bolts to back out of their holes. "Do you have a toolbox down here?" Sarah disappeared into the maze of storage boxes and returned with a red metal toolbox that looked like it hadn't been opened in months. Inside, David's tools were neatly organized and well-maintained, the mark of someone who took pride in being able to fix things. It took about 15 minutes to tighten everything back down and adjust the carburetor slightly. When I started the generator back up, it ran smooth and quiet. "How did you know how to do that?" Sarah asked, genuine admiration in her voice. "You pick things up? Military training? Years of living in cheap apartments where the landlord never fixed anything?" I wiped my hands on an old rag. "Basic mechanical skills come in handy more often than you'd think." "David would have been impressed," she said, then caught herself. "I mean, he would have appreciated someone who could actually fix things instead of just complaining about them." We made our way back upstairs, but instead of returning to the kitchen, Sarah led me into the living room where she'd lit several more candles. The space felt warm and inviting, with a large sectional sofa arranged around a stone fireplace. Family photos covered the mantel, wedding pictures, vacation shots, images of David and Sarah at various stages of their life together. "I should probably take those down," Sarah said, noticing where my attention had gone. "Start fresh, you know." "Don't do anything drastic tonight," I said. "Tomorrow everything might look different." She settled onto one end of the couch and gestured for me to sit beside her. "Or will I wake up and realize that my husband really is gone, and I'm going to have to figure out how to rebuild my entire life at 37 years old?" I sat down, careful to maintain some distance between us despite the magnetic pull I was feeling. 37 isn't old. You've got plenty of time to figure things out. Easy for you to say. You're used to being on your own, making decisions, taking care of yourself. I haven't been single since I was 23. I don't even know who I am when I'm not part of a couple. She curled her legs up under her, and I noticed she was wearing mismatched socks, one blue, one gray. It was such a small human detail that it made her seem more real somehow, more vulnerable. "What did you want to be?" I asked. "When you were younger, before you met David, what did you dream about doing with your life?" Sarah was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with memory. "I wanted to travel," she said. "See the world, experience different cultures, maybe write about it." I had this fantasy about becoming a travel writer, sending dispatches from exotic locations to magazines back home. What stopped you? Life, reality, the need to pay bills and build a stable future. She laughed, but there was sadness in it. David and I met during my last semester of college. He had this job lined up in construction, and it seemed so practical. So solid, I convinced myself that security was more important than adventure. It's not too late, to travel, I mean. Isn't it? I'm almost 40. I've never been further from Pennsylvania than my sister's house in Ohio. I wouldn't even know where to start. Anywhere you want, I said. That's the beauty of it. You can go anywhere, be anyone, do anything. David, leaving as much as it hurts, it's also freedom. Sarah turned to look at me, and in the candlelight I could see something shifting in. Her expression, "You make it sound so simple." Maybe it is simple. Maybe we make it complicated because we're afraid of what we might discover about ourselves. If we actually tried to live the lives we want instead of the lives we think we're supposed to have? Is that what you did? When will your marriage end? Eventually. It took me a while to figure it out, but yeah. I realized I could either spend the rest of my life being angry about what I'd lost, or I could use the freedom to create something new. And you chose process serving? I laughed. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. And it keeps me moving. Keeps me from getting too comfortable in any one place. That's not the life Jennifer wanted, but it's the life that works for me. Sarah shifted on the couch, moving slightly closer. What's the most interesting place your job has taken? You. Last year, I had to serve papers to a guy who was living on a sailboat in the Chesapeake Bay. Spent 3 days tracking him down. Finally found him anchored in this little cove near Annapolis. He invited me aboard for coffee after I served him. And we ended up talking for hours about his decision to sell everything and live on the water. That sounds amazing. He'd been a corporate lawyer for 20 years, made partner at a prestigious firm, had all the traditional markers of success. Then one day he had a mild heart attack at age 45 and realized he'd been living someone else's life. So he bought the boat, learned to sail, and just left. Do you think he was happy? He seemed to be. Said it was the first time in years he'd woken up excited about the day ahead instead of dreading it. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing. This story? I can't remember the last time I was excited about anything, she said finally. Even good things, promotions at work, vacations, birthdays, they all just felt like items to check off a list. What would excite you, if you could? Do anything? Go anywhere? What would make you wake up eager to start the day? I used to love photography, she said after a moment. It's not professional stuff, just capturing moments that meant something to me. I had this old film camera that belonged to my grandmother, and I'd spend hours walking around taking pictures. Of whatever caught my eye? What happened to it? The camera. It's upstairs in a closet somewhere. I stopped using it years ago when digital cameras became popular. David said it was impractical to keep buying film and paying for development, when we could just take pictures with our phones. He wasn't wrong, from a practical standpoint. No, but he was wrong about what mattered. Those film photographs had weight to them, permanence. You had to think about each shot because film costs money. Every picture was intentional. She paused. I have thousands of digital photos on my phone, but I can't remember the last time I actually looked at them. They're just data. Without thinking, I reached over and touched her hand. You could start again. By film. Find places worth photographing. Like where? Anywhere. Everywhere. You could start right here in Pennsylvania and work your way out. Document your journey, your rediscovery of yourself. Sarah turned her hand over so our palms were touching. You really think I could do that? Just pick up and start over? I think you could do anything you set your mind to. The question is what you want badly enough to actually do it. Thunder rumbled overhead, but it seemed more distant now, like the worst of the storm might be moving past us. 2, tilting her head to listen. It's getting quieter, she said. Storm's probably moving inland. We might see some clearing by morning, and then you'll leave. It wasn't a question, and the way she said it made my chest tighten. I'll need to get back on the road, yeah? I've got other deliveries to make, of course. She withdrew her hand from mine, and I immediately missed the contact. This whole evening has been like something out of someone else's life. Tomorrow, everything goes back to normal. Does it have to? The question surprised both of us. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes, and I realized I was crossing into territory I hadn't planned to explore. What do you mean? She asked quietly. I mean, maybe normal is overrated. Maybe normal is what got both of us to the point where we ended. Up, divorced, and alone. Maybe it's time to try something different. Marcus. ... I'm not saying anything has to happen tonight, I said quickly. I'm not trying to take advantage of a vulnerable situation. But this connection we have, this conversation, real. It's more real than anything I've felt in years. Sarah stood up abruptly and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. You don't understand. This morning I was married. This morning I was still pretending my life was fine, that my marriage could be saved if I just tried hard. Enough. And now you're here. And I'm feeling things I haven't felt in years, and I don't know what to do with any of it. I joined her at the window, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body, but not quite touching. You don't have to do anything with it. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever if you don't want to. But you also don't have to. Pretend it isn't happening. She turned to face me, and in the dim light I could see tears glistening in her eyes. I'm scared, she whispered. Of what? Of making another mistake. Of trusting my feelings when my feelings have been wrong before. Of wanting something I can't have. What is it you want? The question hung between us, loaded with possibility and danger. Sarah looked up at me, and I could see her wrestling with herself, trying to decide how honest she was willing to be. I want to feel alive again, she said finally. I want to remember what it's like to matter to someone, to have someone see me as more than just a wife or a paycheck or a responsibility. I want to feel like Sarah again, not just Mrs. Mitchell. You do matter, I said. And you are Sarah, not just somebody's wife. How can you know that? You've known me for 6 hours. Sometimes 6 hours is enough. Sometimes you meet someone and you just ... know. She searched my face in the candlelight, looking for something I hoped she would find. This is crazy, she said. Maybe, but maybe crazy is exactly what we both need. We stood at the window for what felt like an eternity, the space between us charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. I should show you something, she said, her voice barely audible over the now gentle patter of rain against the glass. She disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room with the dancing shadows and the weight of everything that had been said and left unsaid. When she returned, she was carrying a worn leather portfolio that looked like it had seen decades of use. My grandmother's, she explained, settling back onto the couch and patting the cushion beside her. She was a photographer too, back when it was unusual for women to have careers like that. I sat down next to her, closer this time, close enough that our knees almost touched. Sarah opened the portfolio carefully, revealing black and white photographs that were stunning in their composition and emotional depth. She documented the Great Depression in rural Pennsylvania. Sarah said, her fingers tracing the edge of one photograph showing a family standing in front of a ramshackle farmhouse. Local newspapers bought some of her work, but mostly she just did it because she loved capturing stories. The photographs were incredible portraits of weathered farmers, children playing in dusty streets, elderly women sitting on front porches with expressions that spoke of resilience and hope despite hardship. Each image told a complete story in a single frame. She taught me to see. Sarah continued, turning the pages slowly. It's not just to look, but to really see what was happening in front of me. She said the camera was just a tool, but the real work was learning to notice the moments that mattered. These are beautiful, I said, and I meant it. She was incredibly talented. She gave me her camera when I turned 16, said she was too old to chase stories anymore, but she wanted someone in the family to keep the tradition alive. Sarah's voice grew sad. I let her down, let the camera sit in a closet for years while I focused on being practical and responsible. She turned to a section near the back of the portfolio, revealing color photographs that were clearly more recent. These were different from her grandmother's work, less formal, more intimate. Street scenes, close-ups of hands and faces, moments of unexpected beauty in ordinary places. These are yours, I said, from before I got married. I was just starting to find my own style, my own way of seeing things. She pointed to a photograph of an elderly man feeding pigeons in what looked like a city park. I took this in Pittsburgh, the weekend before David proposed. I remember thinking that someday I'd travel to cities all over the world and capture moments like this everywhere I went. Why didn't you? 'Cause David said it was a hobby, not a career. He said we needed to be realistic about our future. Focus on building something stable instead of chasing dreams that might not pay the bills. She closed the portfolio carefully, and he wasn't wrong. Photography is a hard way to make a living. But it wasn't about making a living, was it? Sarah looked at me with surprise, as if no one had ever understood that distinction before. No. It was about capturing life, preserving moments that would otherwise disappear forever, making people see beauty in places they might overlook.
Show
me, I said impulsively. What? Show me how you see things. Right now, tonight. I want to understand what you're talking about. Sarah stared at me like I'd suggested something impossible. Marcus, it's the middle of the night. There's a storm. Outside, I haven't touched a camera in years, so use your phone. The equipment doesn't matter, right? You said it yourself. The camera is just a tool. For a moment, I thought she was going to refuse, but then something shifted in her expression. She pulled out her phone and turned on the camera. Looking around the candlelit living room with new eyes, "Okay," she said quietly, "but you have to promise not to laugh." "I promise." She stood up and began moving around the room, holding her phone at different angles, studying the interplay of candlelight and shadow. I watched her transformation from dejected, abandoned wife to focused artist, and it was like watching someone come alive. "There," she said, taking a shot of her wedding ring still sitting on the kitchen table, surrounded by the warm glow of candles. "That tells a story, doesn't it? Marriage abandoned, but hope still burning." She was right. Even through the small screen of her phone, the composition was powerful, the discarded ring as the focal point, the soft light suggesting possibility rather than finality. "Now this," she said, turning the camera toward me. A stranger in candlelight. Someone who appeared when everything seemed lost. "Sarah, don't move. Just ... be yourself." She took several shots, and I could see her confidence growing with each one. Her movements became more fluid, more purposeful. This wasn't someone who'd forgotten how to take pictures. This was someone who'd been forced to suppress a natural talent. "Your turn," she said suddenly, handing me the phone. "I'm not a photographer. Everyone can learn to see. That's what my grandmother always said. Just look for something that tells a story." I took the phone reluctantly and looked around the room through the camera. At first, everything seemed ordinary. But then I noticed Sarah's reflection in the dark window, her face illuminated by candlelight, her expression intense and focused as she watched me try to understand her world. I took the shot. When I showed it too, her Sarah's breath caught. That's exactly how my grandmother would have seen it. Subject reflected in darkness, light coming from within rather than without. "Beginner's luck?" "No," she said firmly. "That's an eye for composition. You saw the story, someone finding herself again, someone stepping out of the shadows." We spent the next hour taking pictures of everything and nothing, shadows on walls, raindrops on windows, our hands intertwined on the coffee table. Sarah's excitement was infectious, and I found myself seeing the familiar world around us through completely new eyes. "I'd forgotten," she said as we scrolled through the images. I'd completely forgotten how this feels. The way time disappears when you're really focused on capturing something beautiful. It shows. You're completely different when you're behind a camera. Different how? Confidence. Alive. Like you know exactly who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. Sir, I set the phone aside and looked at me directly. That's the first time anyone has said anything like that to me in years. David used to get impatient when I wanted to stop and take pictures. He said it was a waste of time, that we had places to be and things to do. He was wrong, was he? Maybe he was just practical. Maybe I was being selfish, indulging in something that didn't contribute to our life together. I reached over and took her hands in mine. "You listen to me. What we just did? The way you came alive when you started taking pictures again, that wasn't selfish. That was you being authentically yourself for the first time tonight. But it's not realistic. I can't make a living as a photographer, especially. Starting over at my age, who says you have to make a living at it? Who says everything you love has to be monetized? Maybe some things are worth doing just because they make you feel alive. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring down at our joined hands. You know what scares me the most? She said finally. What? That I might actually be capable of being happy. That all these years of settling for less, of convincing myself that contentment was enough, what if I was wrong? What if there's actually more out there for me? Why does that scare you? Because if I'm capable of being happy, really happy, and that means I wasted 22 years of my life being miserable. It means I let fear keep me from becoming the person I was supposed to be. I squeezed her hands gently, or it means you're ready to become that person now. It's not about the time you lost. It's about the time you still have. Sarah looked up at me then, and I could see something fundamental shifting in her expression. The grief and confusion were still there, but underneath them was something else's determination. Maybe, or hope. If I did it, she said quietly, if I actually tried to start over. To build a life around the things that make me feel alive instead of the things that are expected of me, would you think I was crazy? I'd think you were brave. Even if it meant leaving everything behind. This house, this town, the job I've had for 10 years. Especially then, she leaned closer to me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay? Is this real? What's happening between us tonight? Is it real? Or is it just two lonely people finding comfort in each other during a crisis? The question hung between us, demanding an honesty I wasn't sure I was ready to give. But looking at Sarah, seeing the vulnerability in her face, and the hope she was trying so hard to hide, I knew she deserved the truth. It's real, I said. At least for me, it's real. I don't know what it means or where it could go, but what I'm feeling right now, it's not just loneliness or comfort. It's connection. It's recognition. Recognition. Like I'm seeing someone I've been looking for without knowing I was looking. Like you're the missing piece of a puzzle I didn't even know was incomplete. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she was smiling. That's exactly how I feel. Like I've been sleepwalking through my life, and you showing up tonight woke me up. She leaned forward then, closing the last few inches of space between us. Our foreheads touched, and I could feel her breath against my lips. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, she whispered. Neither do I whispered back. But tonight, ... Tonight is ours. And then she kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. It was a kiss that tastes like coffee and possibility, like the end of one story and the beginning of another. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of birds chirping outside. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, the storm, Sarah's desperate invitation, the hours of conversation that had stripped away years of accumulated loneliness. I was lying on the guest room bed, still fully clothed in David Mitchell's borrowed clothes. After our kiss, Sarah and I had talked until nearly 3 a.m. But we'd both agreed that despite the intensity of our connection, moving too fast would complicate an already complex situation. She'd gone to her room, and I'd come too. Mine, but the air between us had remained charged with possibility. The house was quiet as I made my way downstairs. Following the smell of fresh coffee, I found Sarah in the kitchen, standing at the window with a mug in her hands, watching the aftermath of the storm. The backyard was littered with branches and debris. Hot, but the sky was a brilliant blue that made everything look washed clean and new. "Good morning," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned and smiled, and I was struck by how different she looked in the morning light. The haunted expression from the night before had been replaced by something calmer, more resolved. "Good morning. Coffee's fresh. I've been up for about an hour." She poured me a cup and handed it to me, her fingers brushing mine in a way that felt intentional. "I've been thinking about everything, about last night, about David, about what comes next." She gestured toward the window. The storm's over, Marcus. The roads are probably clear by now. I felt my stomach drop. Are you asking me to leave? No, she said quickly. I'm asking you to stay. Not just for another day, but ... stay. Help me figure out what this is between us. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I set down my coffee cup and studied her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or regret. Sarah, I want that more than you know, but you need to be sure. Yesterday your husband walked out on your marriage. It would be understandable if your judgment is my judgment is fine, she interrupted. Stepping closer to me, better than it's been in years, actually. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I know exactly what I want. And what's that? I want to find out who I am when I'm not trying to be who everyone else thinks I should be. I want to take pictures again, travel to places that inspire me, have conversations that matter. She reached up and touched my face gently. And I want to see where this goes with someone who sees me for who I really am. Before I could respond, the sound of a car door slamming echoed from the front of the house.
Ow.
Sarah's face went white. That's David's truck, she whispered. Heavy footsteps crossed the front porch, followed by the jingle of keys and the sound of the front door opening. David Mitchell's voice called out from the foyer, Sarah, Sarah, where are you? We need to talk. Sarah. And I stared at each other, the moment of possibility suddenly shattered by the return of reality. I could see panic flickering in her eyes, but underneath it was something else, a steely determination I hadn't seen before. Stay here, she said quietly. Let me handle this. She walked toward the front of the house, and I heard David's voice. Again, closer now. Jesus, Sarah, what happened here? Why are all these candles everywhere? Oh, and whose car is that in the driveway? His name is Marcus, Sarah replied, her voice steady and calm. He's a process server who got caught in the storm last night. I offered him shelter, a process server. What kind of papers? David's voice cut off abruptly. I knew he'd seen the insurance documents still sitting on the kitchen counter. Where I'd left them, I heard Sarah explain about the settlement, about how the insurance company had finally agreed to pay. David's response was immediate and telling. How much? He asked. How much are they paying? Enough, Sarah said simply. More than enough. There was a long pause, then David's voice again, softer now, almost pleading. Sarah, listen. Ow. I know. I screwed up yesterday. I panicked, okay? It's the accident, the pain, feeling useless while you had to work extra hours to support us. It all got to me. But I came back. I'm here now, and we can work this out. I stayed in the kitchen, knowing I shouldn't eavesdrop, but unable to help myself. This conversation would determine everything, not just for Sarah and David, but for whatever future Sarah and I might have together. Work what out, David? Sarah's voice was getting stronger. Work out the fact that you packed your bags and walked away the minute things got difficult. Work out the fact that you came back as soon as you heard about the insurance money.
Yes.
Not ... It's not about the money, isn't it? Because the timing seems awfully convenient. I heard footsteps, someone pacing. Then David's voice again, more desperate now. Sarah, we've been married for 22 years. You can't just throw that away because of one mistake. I love you. I've always loved you. Have you? Sarah asked, and I could hear the pain in her voice. Because love isn't walking away when things get hard. Love doesn't come back only when it's financially advantageous. Love is showing up every day, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. I can change. And go to counseling, take a vacation, whatever you want. We can start fresh. You're right, Sarah said, and my heart sank. We can start fresh, but not together. The silence that followed was deafening. Then David's voice. Angry now. This is about him, isn't it? About that stranger in our kitchen. Jesus Christ, Sarah. I leave for one day and you're already sleeping with someone else. I didn't sleep with anyone, Sarah replied, her voice ice cold. But even if I had, you gave up the right to have an opinion about my choices when you walked out that door yesterday morning. Sarah? No, David. Listen to me carefully. What happened last night wasn't about Marcus. Not really. It was about me remembering who I used to be before I spent 22 years trying to be the perfect wife for someone who never appreciated what he had. I heard movement. Then David's voice again, closer to the kitchen now. Where is he? I want to talk to this guy. Sarah must have stepped in front of him because David's footsteps stopped. Leave him alone, David. This isn't about him. It's about us. About the fact that we stopped being happy together years ago, and we've both been too afraid to admit it. It can make you happy again. Sarah said, and there was finality in her voice. You can't, and more importantly, I don't want you to try. I want to figure out how to make myself happy for the first time in my adult life. There was another long silence, then the sound of heavy footsteps moving toward the front door. David said, his voice bitter. But don't come crying to me when your rebound relationship falls apart and you realize what you've thrown away. I won't, Sarah replied simply. The front door slammed, followed by the sound of David's truck starting, up and driving away. A few moments later, Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. Are you okay? I asked. I'm better than okay, she said, walking into my arms. I'm free. We held each other for a long moment, processing. What had just happened? When we finally pulled apart, Sarah looked up at me with eyes that were bright with possibility. So she said, Want to help me pack? Pack for what? For whatever comes next. I'm thinking we start with that photography trip I never took. Maybe head west, see what stories we can find along the way. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. That is, if you're interested in a traveling companion, who's still figuring out who she is. I thought about my life, the endless hotels, the solitary meals, the lack of connection that had defined my existence for years. Then I looked at Sarah, this remarkable woman who'd rediscovered her courage. In the space of a single night, I can't think of anything I'd rather do, I said. 3 hours later, we were loading Sarah's grandmother's camera equipment into my Honda Civic alongside her hastily packed clothes. She'd left her wedding ring on the kitchen table next to a note. For David explaining the divorce papers she'd be filing. The insurance money would give her the freedom to start over. But more importantly, she'd found the courage to choose happiness over security. As we drove away from 847 Maple Street, Sarah rolled down the passenger window and held her grandmother's old film camera up to capture our departure. The click of the shutter seemed to mark the end of one story and the beginning of another. Where to first? I asked. Sarah studied the road atlas spread across her lap, then looked up at me with a smile that promised adventures I couldn't even imagine. Surprise me, she said. And as we headed west into a future full of unknown possibilities, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected nights really do change everything. Sometimes a stranger's desperate invitation becomes the first step toward a life you never knew you wanted. And sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's actually the beginning of everything falling into place. The road stretched out ahead of us, full of stories waiting to be discovered and photographs waiting to be taken. In years, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.